Good morning. Okay, all right, yeah. This is me over here in the middle of the Gobi Desert. It's a good way to start the talk. Let's go back there. So I'm 21. I was studying at Harvard, but I've now dropped out, and I'm back in Hong Kong for the foreseeable future. And I guess I always love this photo because that's me there with a blue scarf around my head, and that's the middle of the Gobi Desert. And it's an interesting place to find yourself when you turn 18. And sort of like, for me, the change didn't come in the Gobi Desert, change came much earlier. So I guess the story today I'd like to tell you about is how I ended up in the Gobi Desert and some of the lessons that I learned along the way. Perhaps there's no running theme, but it's just intrigue and things I've had the time now to think about, which have helped me, I think, and can help you. I'm 21 at the moment, so I don't think there's too much difference between us. So I was 14 years old in Hong Kong, and one of my best friends, a kid I had actually grown up with, who my mum had known as long as I'd been alive, his name was Joshua Hellman. And he, at around 11 years old, was diagnosed with an orphan disease. And orphan diseases are diseases which are so rare that they basically go under the radar with regard to pharmaceutical research and development. These are diseases which affect 1 in a million people. And so it doesn't become economically feasible to find cures because there's no market. So he had this disease that really no one knew anything about and suffered from it. Basically what happened was he had a missing enzyme which resulted in strokes, and so these strokes would increase in frequency, and initially, I think we would say in life if you had 1 or 2 strokes you'd be an incredibly unlucky person. He'd be lucky if he had 2 in a year. And so I saw this friend of mine who I'd gone running out and playing with go from being very active to in a wheelchair, partially blind, deaf, and that had really a big effect on me, because I mean people had passed away, but they'd been older people, not necessarily a friend of mine. And it did happen over time, but it felt very sudden. And I remember being, at the end of year 10 I went to boarding school in England, and it was summer holidays, and I went to go stay the night at his home. This was in 2007. And he was pretty debilitated then, so we just played video games for 48 hours. That's what we did. And halfway through staying at his home, he did have another seizure, and I had to leave his home, and that was the last time I saw my friend. I went to boarding school in England, and the next thing I had heard is he passed away. And at that age, it was it was a tough thing for me to do, and I didn't really have an idea of how I might make a difference or enact change in any small way, but it was something that had just affected me. So I wanted to make a difference. His mom set up a charity in his memory, and a year later, in 2008, called the Joshua Hellman Foundation for Orphan Disease, just basically pooling together people who suffered from orphan diseases, not offering a miraculous cure, but just a base of support. And so I really wanted to do something in memory of a friend of mine, and at that age, I couldn't give the money that, say, my parents could. So I thought, what's a challenge I can do? I didn't stumble in any mountaineers, so I didn't have Everest. But I was sitting on a table with a few friends in boarding school, and we were talking about summer plans. It was typical English weather. I remained optimistic, and I had 40 days to train, and I was wearing rugby shorts whilst running with this dumb stuff I do like that. And eventually I did it, and I ran 4 stages of support for them, and I got to the end of a place called Monkey Hill, and just saw thousands of monkeys all around me, and in reality there were about 3. So at this point I stopped, and I was put on drip in hospital and just been dead for 2 days. And then I realized I actually really liked what I'd done, but I needed to train if I did it again. And so from there I did a whole bunch of challenges, which eventually led me to the desert. And nothing I did was self-initiated from that point onwards. The only thing was really if you like, the seed I had planted was just the walk across England. Everything else was people who came up to me and said, would you like to do something? The Gobi was the same thing. One thing, a lesson I hadn't learned until the Gobi, was that the reason or the motivation you have to complete an endurance challenge can overshadow that challenge. When you really believe in what you're doing, for example, in memory of my friend Joshua, no matter what, I would make it, because the cause overshadowed the challenge. The challenge was nothing compared to what I was doing it for. But some challenges get so big that, in fact, whatever reason you have for completing that challenge is going to be overshadowed by just the overwhelming difficulty you face. And I found this to be the case in the Gobi Desert. So the goal was to walk 1,600 kilometers across the desert. And there is just no way that you can logically reason with yourself that what you're doing makes any sense at all. You're walking across a desert. I mean, why not walk across, more arid, less arid land, perhaps a forest? It's also the most extreme desert in the world, so you're talking about temperatures of up to 40 degrees in the day and then minus 5, 10 in the night. And you're doing this unsupported with camels, finding your own water, and you're walking. There's plenty of other modes of transport. We could have ridden the camels. And a lot of people discovered this, so we went with a team of 14 expeditioners from all walks of life. I mean, the toughest of the tough to myself, basically. And within 3 weeks, 4 people had dropped out. And those were the people who had gone there and perhaps had thought that this was an amazing way to raise money for a cause, or had a great conversation or a life event, and had soon realized that there were far easier ways to do that than walk across a desert. And so for me, I sort of changed the way I thought about the expedition. And in fact, that's a speech on its own, and I wish I had time to tell you how that worked. But it's really important to realize that noble intentions don't necessarily help you meet your objectives all the time, and that you need to be very practical about getting to where you want to be, as was the case in the desert, where even though we were raising money to build schools, that wasn't what got me to the end. The other thing is that motivation it always exists in some form or another, but it may not be in the way you think it is. So, for example, if you're working really hard at IB, and perhaps you lack a bit of motivation, it perhaps is because you're actually not. The desire to become a doctor isn't really the motivation you're looking for. The picture I use in this is of a monastery that we stumbled upon in the Gobi Desert. So the Gobi, completely empty. And in fact, in the 20s and 30s, Mongolia was notorious for the communists at the time eradicating any form of Buddhism in the entire country. And so any sort of old monastery is very, very difficult to find if it's not in ruins. So we were in the middle of the Gobi, and all of a sudden we saw a speck on one of the Altai mountains, which is the mountain range in the Gobi Desert. And it was just the white speck of this temple, and it looked so strange, and we actually approached it, and this is what we found. There was a little spring coming out of the mountain, and there was an entire community. So deep in this kind of arid, lifeless place, not a tree, not a plant in sight, was this vegetarian Mongolian Buddhist community. It was just very hard to find, and I think it's the same thing with all of us. It's not a active process. You don't sit down and say, what's going to get me across the desert? What's going to get me the grades or the university I want to go to or the job I want? It's going to be something passive that you're only going to discover by keeping on going and going and going on at it, whatever it is. And the capacity for human stubbornness is incredible. And personally, I believe that your legs, your arms are secondary to your mind. If you really, really want something, you'll get it, whether your legs are completely broken. It depends on your motivation. And like I said, the motivation everyone has, it just goes to show how much you want it. I have a friend of mine who's just come out of Israeli Special Forces, where he was for 5 years. And one quote he likes to throw at me all the time is that, when you're completely tired, when you think you've completely exhausted all of your resources, you've just used 10% of what you're capable of. And it's very, very true. If you have that, the mind is really the principal inhibitor to what the body can achieve. When you feel completely exhausted and dead, your body is unbelievably capable of more. And I found that to be the case in the Gobi Desert. This is a photo when we got to the end. You can see a bit of green turning up in the distance, finally getting out of the desert. Having walked 1,600 kilometers, we actually did it in 2 months. Not showered or anything, hence the crisp look. And so I would really just be very wary of perceived boundaries. And a good way to break down seemingly impossible tasks a good way to conquer them is to break them down. So for example, I was never thinking beyond 1 day in the Gobi Desert. I never ever, I didn't know where we were, I didn't care where we were. I just took 1 day at a time. And perhaps you even need miniature motivations to get you through a single day. And so that might, in my case, that might be, a bit of an extra lump of sugar in my tea in the evening, or some more sweets or something. But the end goal is always way too abstract. And people who walk into a challenge like walking the Gobi and say, I'm doing this to walk 1,000 miles, will soon realize after 2 days, where we covered in our first 2 days about 20 miles, that that's inconceivably difficult, and the motivation will be overshadowed by the objectives of the expedition. So this was in a sense a bit of a race, but at the same time I appreciated the expedition goals of doing something else. And for me, life is almost like a race, especially as students. We have this paradox where our parents are constantly telling us that, oh, you're young, YOLO, live once, you guys should enjoy yourself and do young people stuff. And at the same time, grades, and you realize real life isn't about criteria filling or grades. No one's there to measure you. And if you don't have genuine motivation for what you want to do, you're stuffed. And so it's really, really important that you consider what you want to do. You take the time to do what you individually want to do. And so I'll talk a bit about what I mean by that. For example, here, I listened to a talk by Alistair Humphreys a few weeks ago, and he was talking about micro-adventures, the idea that you don't need to walk across a desert to have an expedition. You can just go out your back door from 5 p.m. when you get out of work, in his case, to 9 a.m. when you start again. In my opinion, my theory is that university, jobs, purpose, everything like that, I shouldn't say that, 90% of that is defined by what you do at 5 p.m. to 9 a.m. When you are an excellent mathematician or an excellent IB scorer, remember that the framework you're competing in is against millions of people around the world. So when you may be the best person at English or history or whatever it is, but just remember, forget about just IB, A-levels, all these frameworks, you're competing against those people, millions around the world. How can you possibly expect to find something that you're really passionate about when, in the sense of being the best, there are millions? For example, in my case, applying to Harvard was a very, very intimidating thing, because by far I was one of the weaker candidates academically. So what universities do today, the cutting edge ones, is they say, okay, we accept the fact that you're good at academics, and that's a good thing, it shows you work hard. What do you do outside of academics? And then people play violin, and they play tennis, and they play golf, but these once again are frameworks. Right? So in a roundabout way, the best way to kind of make yourself interesting to the opportunities you want, whether that's university or jobs, is to pursue things that you are completely passionate about. Because you can't be fatigued by that, because it's easy to find motivation to pursue those things, and because it's probably entirely unique. Today I find myself in a position where I run 2 companies. One of them takes young people on expeditions around the world, the other runs 24-hour races in 3 countries. You know who my competitors are? Nobody. Literally, I am the only person in the market doing that at the moment. And it's not a place I could have predicted I would have ended up. It's certainly not a degree I could have got. But it was a process that was defined to me between 5 p.m. And 9 a.m. The hours that we have free, the hours where we can pursue what we want. Don't get the wrong message. I'm not suggesting that school means nothing. But I'm suggesting that you should really focus on what you're doing outside of your school hours as well. And that they're more important in the grand scale of things than perhaps what you do in a subject. So finally, my topic title, what does that have to do with anything? Well, first of all, philanthropy through endurance. It's such a nebulous and abstract relationship. What does crossing a desert have to do with raising funds for a school? And this is a question I'm confronted with a lot. Why should I give you money so that you can go on a little holiday and push yourself, or whatever you want to call it, but basically take some cool photos of nomads? And so for me, I've had a hard time thinking about it. I mean, it makes sense in my mind. It feels quite natural that should work, but actually, in terms of explaining it, it's pretty difficult. For me, though, endurance is the currency of philanthropy. So what you're doing really is you're saying, I'm going to sacrifice myself, mentally, physically, my body, my mind, to show you how much I care about the cause. And the more I do something unexpected of me, the more you must assume that I'm doing it for a reason. For example, and this is the beauty of philanthropy through endurance, it doesn't require people walking across desert. It requires you doing something that you don't want to do, that's unexpected of you. How many of you in here are not regular runners? Okay, there you go, right? So let's just, for those unregular runners, let's say you went home and you suddenly announced you were doing a marathon. And let's say that you were going to do it for the cancer fund because perhaps a relative has passed away recently. When confronted with this scenario, your family and friends are going to think one of three things, right? You've gone completely bonkers, mental, wow, okay, you've never run anything more than 200 meters in your life and suddenly you want to do a marathon. Maybe they think, oh, self-image, maybe you want to get fit, whatever. Well, the third sort of option is they're going to think, wow, they care about this so much, they're willing to do something that they would never otherwise do. And that's the power of endurance, is that it does demonstrate how much you are for a cause. And some people say, yeah, but then why don't I give the money to you directly to the charity that you're doing it for? And my answer is, why would you? It's not like you came across this cause in your everyday life. And so also this challenge, which can be an amazing thing or it can be a simple thing, is a good way of marketing that cause, and connecting the cause with donors in a way, using free market principles in a way that works naturally, according to principles of economics. So for me, there's a very beautiful and explainable connection between philanthropy and endurance. What does this have to be with you being selfish and stubborn? Do any of you know the author Ayn Rand? Okay, that's good to hear. You guys should read her books. I would say she's the best, one of the best authors of the 20th century, if not the best philosopher. And she basically said that selfishness is a good thing. And this is how it works. A lot of us, especially as young people, are living incredibly selfless lives. We're living for those around us, right? We're getting the good grades to make mom and dad proud, or we're buying this and that because it makes a good image in society or around our friends and family. Rarely do we stop and think about what makes us happy deep down. Even when we want to earn a lot of money, that's not truly a selfish thing, that's a selfish thing. You want to get the car, you want to get the house, because that increases your image in society. But if you do something truly selfish, that you truly believe in, I mean, that's a good thing. So in that sense, selfishness can be a good thing, and that was what I did. I said, I want to do something in memory of my friend. It has nothing to do with what's going on with people around me. It has to do with what I want to do. And that led me on the path that I am today, feeling pretty confident about where I am in life. So being selfish, I feel, is very important. At the same time, being stubborn, and that's never, never, ever giving up. And that's a harder lesson. That's the lesson of endurance itself. Between the time that you plant that seed of whatever, that initial event that you take, you don't just suddenly, I didn't just overnight find myself heading up to charities. It happens, it's a gradual process. It started 5 or 6 years ago when I decided to walk across England. People often assume that, I don't know, this is, once again, we tend to judge events just for what they are, discreetly. And so if today the difference that you wanted to make to your life was running a marathon, you might go, but that's not the Gobi, that's not anything impressive. But that's not true. You've got to start from somewhere, and you certainly won't be starting on Everest or in the Gobi Desert. And so that's really important that you be time they say, work hard. Why do I have to work hard? Just work hard. Okay, all right, I'll work hard. And so you're constantly, in a sense, you're running, right? You're going for the next deadline, you're going for the next grade, and before you know it, you'll end up like me. I mean, this is not like me exactly, but some of my friends perhaps. And you get to university, and you don't know what the hell you're going to do. Literally, you've spent your whole life getting these abs and you continue to pursue that which you believe in. That you have, and those core beliefs that you have, the chances are you won't get whimsical, you won't go on a different path, and you'll continue to pursue that, and you can only get better. So really today, that's the message I want to leave you with. Be aware of the connection between philanthropy and endurance, but also be aware that the ramifications of that connection carry well beyond running, swimming, whatever, for a charity. It's just the simple message that you should do something that you care about in life. And if it benefits the community around you, good. But if it just benefits you, that's fine as well. In order to help others, you need to first be able to help yourself. And that's the note I leave you on. If you're interested in the work, the expedition we're doing, the Youth Endurance is our website. I know Elsa's planning to be involved in the 24-hour race, so I'm sure you guys have the link to that. Thank you very much for listening.